Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and a warm welcome to Business Africa. I'm your host Nadia Bane. The top stories this week. The global displacement crisis has surged to unprecedented levels, with Africa accounting for over 40% of the total. Some experts advocate for a shift towards private sector-led interventions for long-term solutions. Ivory Coast takes pride in hosting the African Cup of Nations. This has spurred numerous entrepreneurs to exert considerable effort in capitalizing on the event. Amid OPEC's recent decision to cut production quotas, Angola, the second largest oil producer in Africa, has chosen to leave the organization. This departure highlights the significant influence of production quota decisions on global oil prices. Continuing a decade-long trend, the number of forcibly displaced Africans, primarily driven by conflict, has surged in the past year, reaching a staggering total of 40 million individuals. This intricate issue not only presents immediate humanitarian challenges, that also carries economic implications that extend far beyond the borders of the nations directly involved. Substantial private sector-led intervention is needed to mitigate the crisis.
Over the past decade, forced displacement in Africa has surged, with sub-Saharan Africa hosting over 44 million displaced individuals, accounting for 45% of the global total, according to the UNHCR. Recent years have witnessed a notable increase in forced displacement on the continent, rising from 36 million in 2021 to 45 million in 2023, with most of the Sahel and countries such as the DRC and Sudan showcasing the highest number of displaced people due to conflict. Examining the broader economic implications in sub-Saharan Africa, conflict emerges as a significant impediment to growth. Real GDP growth is on average about 2.5 percentage points lower in conflict cases. The economic repercussions of conflict and instability are evident, notably in Sudan. This crisis extends to neighboring countries such as the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, which, despite facing their own crises, have accommodated numerous displaced individuals. The conflict in Sudan has significantly disrupted not only trade routes but also essential imports and crucial economic ties, leading to the suspension of trade activities with nations such as Egypt and the UAE. Depriving Sudan of foreign currency needed for the acquisition of vital imports. While humanitarian efforts remain crucial, the imperative for sustainable approaches, facilitating integration and livelihood support, has become increasingly apparent. In this context, the private sector plays a pivotal role, leveraging resources and expertise to promote economic empowerment and social inclusion.
Joining us for more insight on the matter is Mr. Isaac Kwaku Fuquo, founder of the Amaoro Coalition. Mr. Fuquo, welcome. How significant is the economic impact of the displacement crisis in Africa?
The economic loss is quite high to the continent, and I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, we don't quantify that. We look at this situation usually through the lens of a humanitarian issue, as opposed to economic issue. In terms of economic loss, if you look at Sudan alone, the economy is predicted to have shrunk by about 12% in 2023. That's a very big number for a country that is very pivotal to the Horn of Africa, that has 7 countries surrounding it. And the net impact of that economic loss to the neighbors is also quite high. Kenya's tea exports dropped as a result of the civil unrest in Sudan, which means that Kenya was exporting a lot of tea to Sudan, and as a result of the conflicts, Kenya cannot export tea to Sudan anymore, which obviously affects labor issues, affects employment, GDP, what have you. These are just some examples of how these conflicts and these levels of displacement affect our economies in a very real way, because it doesn't just impact the country where that is happening, it also impacts the country where things are exported and imported.
Mr. Fuquo, how can private sector-led intervention help mitigate the displacement crisis in Africa, and why should it?
I think a lot of times we don't give our governments enough credit for what they do right. Despite these wonderful efforts by government and humanitarian organizations, private sector has a pivotal role to play in this conversation. And why is that? One, because Africa's private sector has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. There's so much private capital in the African economies. For me, I look at this in a couple of ways as private sector. First of all, that you're investing into a conversation. You're not giving charity. It's not a CSR effort. You're not helping somebody else. You're investing in your own economic activity. Why? Because the peace and stability of nation states is imperative to how business runs. Secondly, you're investing into the labor force for the future. If you're a Kenyan company and Somalia is at war, Somalia is under conflict, and you invest in Somalian refugees or people who are displaced internally even, you're investing in future labor force. Secondarily, you're also now investing into the infrastructure of these countries to make sure that when you're doing business, that the business runs smoothly. And thirdly, because it's also the right thing to do, and it's okay to say that, doing good ensures that we all rise together for the Africa that we want.
There are instances where private sector-led interventions have been made, some working even, but the problem seems to be sustainability. What should be done differently?
One of the things that we can do differently is that this conversation, at least on the African continent, has to be African-led. So I'll give you an example. In 2018, the IFC did a study called Kakuma as a marketplace. As a result of that, Good Life Pharmacy, which is a pharmacy chain in Kenya, opened a branch in Kakuma. And also, more importantly, it's also up to us to work with our international partners because we need partnerships. How do we ensure that as we're coming up with bankable projects, as companies are willing to help, as companies internationally are coming to do some good in our communities, that we have the necessary research, the necessary data, we have the necessary supply of labor, the supply of information that actually addresses really, really important conversations and work side by side our partners to make this happen. And it's not led by somebody else, but it's led by the African private sector actors.
Mr. Foucault, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work that you do.
Beyond the exhilarating matches, the Africa Cup of Nations in Ivory Coast has sparked a desire for unforgettable experiences. This has prompted entrepreneurs in entertainment, accommodation and fashion to seize the moment despite facing numerous economic challenges. Have a look.
Ivory Coast celebrates the 34th edition of the African Cup of Nations. The government has explicitly invested over $1 billion in the organization of this tournament, which kicks off on January 13th. The country's authorities have high hopes in nurturing the ambitions of making this competition a real showcase for Côte d'Ivoire's investments. Against this backdrop, many entrepreneurs in the entertainment and housing industry are mobilizing to capitalize on the increased demand. Audrey Bella, an associate promoter of the Kana Koma village in Abidjan, alongside her partners, have seized this opportunity to develop their business. More than 2 million foreigners have set foot on Ivorian soil, so obviously this is a business opportunity. We all know that not everyone will have the chance to go to the stadiums. That's why we've made this beautiful place available. Similarly, Marcone, the owner of a chain of furnished residents in Abidjan and in other places, see the AFCON organized in Ivory Coast as an exceptional opportunity to maximize his financial gains. Normally, after the festive season, January is a month with the least visitors. So with AFCON, we are seeing this number increase. We've had calls to book furnished flats. So it's good for us. It's good for Ivory Coast. So we are very happy to receive it. So yes, it's a gift from God. AFCON 2023 goes far beyond the moments of joy on the pitch. It opens doors for local entrepreneurs, creating significant opportunities for the country's economic growth and development.
Angola's unexpected decision to exit the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in December sent geopolitical ripples across the global energy market, raising questions about the consequences and implications of this departure for the Central African nation.
Angola's decision to exit OPEC, driven by frustration over the lack of influence on quotas and concerns about adhering to production limits, signals a significant shift in the global oil landscape, as announced by Angolan Energy Minister Diamantino Pedro Azevedo. The nation holds a quota of 1.11 million barrels of oil per day, within OPEC's 30 million barrel allocation for 2024, despite producing 1.13 million barrels as of November 2023. While the departure may not substantially impact global production, it opens the door for Brazil to enter OPEC, reshaping the organization's geopolitical dynamics. However, the move carries economic implications for Angola, the sixth largest oil producer globally. With oil fueling 90% of Angola's exports, 60% of budget revenue and 40% of GDP, according to leading trade risk management expert Coface, going solo in a volatile market exposes the nation to increased price fluctuations and diminished influence without OPEC support. The absence of OPEC backing may also pose challenges in attracting new investors, as Angola competes with established OPEC players. Nevertheless, this departure presents opportunities for Angola to pursue lucrative deals elsewhere, potentially with major players like India and China. Angola's exit from OPEC, amid the global shift towards sustainability at COP28, exposes its heavy reliance on oil as a potential vulnerability. The nation must now adapt to market changes while navigating the evolving global energy landscape.
That's our show for this week. I've been your host. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africa News and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.